All right, welcome everyone for a Christmas edition of our DevTools Porto. So just very quickly say a few words. So DevTools Porto is a small meetup for developers in Porto. We are pretty much developers, and we want to hear what's happening, what are the cool things that we need to learn about, and we invite people to come and just share. Where you can find us, we have several places. We typically advertise through our startup. We called Reviewpad, so you can obviously get all the YouTube videos from previous in YouTube channel, and also just find us on Discord as well, and on Twitter. You can hear my echo a little bit. And so today we have Bruno from Codotto, and we'll be talking about VueJS. And yeah, quite exciting to see what's the latest and greatest thing happening in the, I guess, front-end development type of thing. So without further ado, let's welcome Bruno.
Thank you. Let's go here. Where's the happen to know? Oh, next one. Oh, okay. Oh, you said tab. Okay, got it. Yeah. There we go. Okay, perfect. Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for Reviewpad for inviting me to talk here today. Today I'll be talking about Vue.js, why, when, and how. A lot of people of you guys already know what Vue.js is, and we're going to go over a little bit. It's not a new framework, but it is always worth to talk about a little bit, and it is what we use in Codotto. So basically, we're going to have eight most important points in Codotto, in this presentation right now to talk about. And we're going to talk a little bit about what is JavaScript, the history of JavaScript, most of the problems. And then in the end, we're going to talk about the ecosystem of Vue.js. Yeah, so for those of you guys who don't know me, I'm Bruno Francisco. I work with computers, a wannabe front-end developer. I work at Codotto, and originally I am from Brazil. Well, first of all, how can we, before even talking about Vue.js, we need to talk about what exactly is JavaScript. And in a very simple definition, as it is in the Mozilla website, JavaScript is a lightweight, interpreted, or just-in-time compiled programming language with first-class functions. And a very simple example of code in JavaScript would be this 4 or 5 lines of code where we can define constants, functions, and constants that hold functions, and so on. Well, a little bit of history of JavaScript. It's important so that we can understand why did we leave JavaScript, and we went through jQuery and all the way to Vue.js, React.js, and all the other reactive frameworks that we have. Well, 1995, it was invented by Brendan Eich, and it was basically invented for the browser at the time called Netscape 2. And they wanted to have a little reactivity or interactivity happening on their web pages. So that's why the language was invented. And it was invented in 10 days. Unfortunately, I thought it was 7, but it's 10 days. And in 1997, the ECMA 262 was introduced. That is basically a specification so that all browsers should implement these specifications so that JavaScript works the same in all browsers. And in 2015, the most important one, ECMA 6 was introduced, and mostly the functions that we see today as sort and a bunch of other ones was introduced in this ECMA 6. Yeah, so what are the problems of using plain JavaScript? Well, the first one that we have here, it's if we want to create, for example, there's a lot of pseudocode here, but it's very good to exemplify the problem that we have. So if we have a page for simply creating a user, we have a lot of other things omitted, of course, but we have a button, and then we have, when we want to click on this button, we want to call this function called createUser. And we're going to do a bunch of things. We're going to disable this button so that the user can't click a lot of times. We're going to add a loading state, and then we're going to try to make a request to our API to actually create this user in our backend. And basically, this is a different way to do using jQuery. But you can imagine that using this in several pages, it becomes a lot of code that you have to manage. Imagine that a page, you can create a user, you can create a post, and a bunch of other things. So you will have to manage all of that code, and you do not have any components involved right now. So a lot of things to manage. It's really hard to scale your application in this way. And for example, over here, we have that function called add loading state to the button. And over here, we would simply get the button to create the user and add, for example, a loading and remove the loading later on in another state. So this is a single example, as I said, in a single page. Imagine this, multiply this by hundreds of pages, which in today's world, web applications are basically becoming the same as native applications. So very hard to manage all of this. Well, what are the disadvantages of following that application? It's very useful for simple applications, but as your code base grows, we're going to have several of these disadvantages. The first one is going to be code duplication. The same code you're going to find in several places. You can still manage with imports and exports, but it's still going to be really hard for you to manage. Manipulating the DOM, every time that we need to do something, us, the developers, we need to be able to, we need to take care of updating the DOM, add a state on a button, remove a state, add a new div, or so on. Loss of productivity because of manipulating the DOM. We have another concern that we have to take care of. And the fourth one is reinventing the wheel. So the framework, in my opinion, and a lot of other developers as well, the framework should be the one responsible for manipulating the DOM for you. You should only care about the data itself. Well, what if we could move the responsibility of building the DOM to the framework and let it react to the data changes that we do to our code? And in this case comes VueJS and a bunch of other frameworks as well, such as React, Angular, and a bunch of other ones as well that does exactly the same. Vue has a bunch of advantages that we're going to talk about a little bit later. And what is VueJS? Well, VueJS, it's, if we can define in a single sentence, is a reactive framework. As the name says, it is to, I mean, as it says here, it is for building user interfaces. But the main point, and as the name says, a reactive framework, you should only care about what the data does. I mean, what the data that you have, and the framework will be able to build the DOM for you. So a very simple example here. In the example before, we had to manage whenever there was an input and updating the DOM and so on. VueJS, in this case, the only thing we need to do is we declare a constant, in this case, message, that is going to be a reference. In this case, the same as reactive, sort of. But for this presentation, let's say it's the same. And as soon as I update this value of message, it's going to be reflected on the DOM on this H1 node. So I don't have to be worrying about, I don't have to be building the DOM anymore. I just need to take care of the data that I have. And the framework is going to be reactive. So how VueJS solves the issues of previous frameworks and libraries? And in this case here, we're talking about jQuery as well. So a very simple example, in vanilla JavaScript, what we would do is whenever we want to update, we have an input, and let's say it is to get the first name of the user, and we just want to simply do an H1 of hello and the name of this user. In vanilla JavaScript, we would have first to get this input, and then we would have to get that span so that I can target that and update this, the inner value of this span. And would have a variable to hold this first name, and then, of course, add an event listener whenever there's an input on this input field, please do something. And in this case, this function does exactly that. In jQuery, almost exactly the same thing. It's just a couple of shortcuts that we can use that jQuery actually provides us. And in Vue.js, we went from, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was 35 lines to basically around 20 lines or 25 lines of code. And the most important of all is that this over here can go into a component. So if I want to reuse this same logic in another component, in another page, or in another part of my application, I can just import this component. There's no duplicating logic anymore. And in this example, it's very simple. I have an input, and it listens to the event input and execute this function on first name input. And over there, the only thing that I need to do is update my variable first name value. And once again, I do not have to worry about the DOM. The DOM is going to update automatically for me. Yeah, and as I said, with jQuery, you need to take care of the painstaking, fragile process of updating the views each time the data changes. And with Angular or Vue or any reactive framework, this is usually taken care for you. You only need to worry about updating the underlying data, and the views will update automatically for you. Yeah, but wait, of course, there's more. Well, Vue.js has a bunch of other things that are included, such as watchers, computed properties, and so on. For this presentation, we're only going to be talking about two very simple ones, but there are hundreds of other, let's call features that Vue.js has, and it's pretty cool to take a look at in a more advanced style. But in this case, a watcher, for example, when I update the first name, the variable first name, I can watch for the changes that happen, and then I can do something about it. So I import from Vue this watch function, and I watch for my first name. Whenever something happens, I'm going to execute this function. So in this case, I'm just doing a console log of the value. But you can imagine that you could make a request to the API and check if this first name is available or if it's taken or anything that you can imagine. And computed properties, as the name says, it is you get an original value and you compute to something different that you want. So there's going to be a dependence here. And in this case, a very simple example as well. For a first name, the user inputs his first name, and let's say that I would like to have his first name showed in an uppercase. I can have a computed property for that as well. So yeah, why use Vue.js? In which cases you should opt to use Vue.js? So there are like 6 big ones that I like to consider. The first one is easy to learn. Trust me, when I dropped Vue.js in the company where I work for, and for junior developers, front-end developers, they get on pretty quick with Vue.js. React has a very steep learning curve. Angular the same. Vue.js is pretty easy to get. Flexibility, you can add to new projects or you can start project from the beginning. And Vue.js, it is built to be incrementally adopted. So you can adopt several packages or just Vue.js, the framework itself right now. Readability, the single file components and component base, as we said many times here. Lightweight, only 18 kilobytes. Robust tooling, the ecosystem is extremely, extremely rich. A lot of people working overtime to make a lot of great tools that they have. And high performance as well. This very controversial, of course. A lot of benchmarks that can say otherwise, but a lot of benchmarks that says as well that Vue is much faster than React and Angular. And what are some of the use cases of Vue.js? Well, first one, server-side rendering. Most of the pages right now are by default being server-side rendering. Single-page applications, those pages that basically you download the entire JavaScript at the first request, and then your browser take care of for you. So the whole page is built on the client side. High interactivity pages that you need to, let's say, create a game or even interfaces that are going to be highly interactive. And also static site generations. There are some plugins for Vue.js and Vite in this case that can help you on this case as well. Yeah, and for the last, VueJS ecosystem, some of the meta frameworks and supporting libraries, and much more that it offers. This is just a couple of examples, but you can use, for example, Vue SSR as we spoke, Vue test utils to test your front-end projects, Vue DevTools to actually help you debug your development process, the Vue CLI as well, Vue Router, and Vuex, which is basically a state management for your application, and a bunch of others that unfortunately it's not able to introduce here. Yeah, so thank you very much for the time, and thank you very much for taking the time for listening for the talk. Thank you.
All right, I think we have some time for questions. So maybe I can start. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about, so usually there's like a big company behind all these big frameworks, like you know, Google or Meta or Mozilla. What about Vue.js? Is it like much more community driven, or is there like a set of companies which are really like pushing forward?
So the person that we have to thank here is actually Evan Yu. He used to work for Google, and he used to work directly with Angular, and he saw the painstaking of working with Angular and all of the problems that it had. So he decided to create Vue from that. So he left Google at the time to actually create Vue, and it's been a huge success, as you guys can see. And so far, still no company is behind Vue.js. It's only Evan Yu and the whole Vue.js core team, which I think right now it's around 8 people. And they are basically funded by either open initiatives or companies that contribute to open source and donate money to them. Thanks.
Anyone wants to ask something?
So I actually, to be honest, I just read about the Vue.js, but I work with React. But when you said it's easier for someone to actually get along with or start with Vue.js, I actually found that that is true also for React. But again, I didn't put my hands on Vue.js. So what makes you think, or what are the concepts that Vue.js compare with React? Angular I can understand because it can be quite complicated to start with Angular. At least the one that I tried, which was Angular 1. Now
okay.
But what will be the key points that will make it easier for someone to start with Vue.js compared with React?
For me, the first one is documentation. React, back in the day, they made it a lot better right now for you to go through the documentation and follow examples. React, at its beginning or its infancy, it was considered more of a library than actually a framework. So you could start your project and you could throw anything that you want in any folder. So Vue.js, for example, as soon as you start a project, that's why it's called a framework. It limits you to work on that way. And you need to have your projects like that. So if I get in a new Vue.js project, I know where things are going to be: components, routes, and stores as well. So in React, I think the first one would be documentation. And the second point, important as well, is that Vue.js was created from the ground up to be incrementally adopted. So if you want to drop just Vue.js over there, you could. In React, if I'm not mistaken, I might be mistaken here, back in the day, you could not drop React in the middle of a page. You had to start your whole project as a React project from the ground up. While Vue, from the beginning, if you want just a simple div in your page to have a Vue instance on that div, you could do that from the beginning of Vue project. Yeah, those are the two main ones.
Another question. One thing that I found really, really important in these kind of tools, especially front-end tools, it's the dev tools that support you in order to actually understand what's happening. Especially when you are dealing with people DOM and all that kind of stuff. When you have watchers and things like understanding understanding when you change something, what that means in terms of redrawing your page or the components. Does Vue has this kind of that to help with that?
Yeah.
And again, if they are easy to use and compare with other tools.
Yeah. One thing that it's important to say as well, it's not come to the presentation and say like just the positive things. Of course, React has a 1,000 times more enriched ecosystem than Vue. A lot of libraries exist there, and user interfaces, user kits exist there as well. But in VueJS, it's much lower. So for example, and directly answering your question, in React, we have React DevTool, if I'm mistaken. And in VueJS, we have Vue DevTool. So it's same principle, does the same thing. You can watch the timelines, components, hierarchy, and everything else. And all of the tools that exist in React, you usually have in Vue.js as well. The only thing that we have less, I would say, would be meta frameworks, where in React, for example, we have Remix right now. What was the Next.js, for example? In Vue.js, the only framework that it's currently the most popular one and that I'm aware of, it's Nuxt.js. We don't have any other option. So yeah, it's the ecosystem is almost the same, and it helps you a lot on the development side as well. So it's I would say it's very equal, but the ecosystem is much bigger on the React side.
Question. So what do you think is better, composition or Opens API?
Options API, yeah. For me, without a doubt, composition API. And why? Like elaborating a little bit on the question, it's mostly because I'm a person that I like to be organized, and Options API, it is possible to have this organization that you have, but Composition API, in another sense, gives you much extra power, and it's not a doubt why it's called a first-class API. You can just import directly what you want, and you're gonna reuse right at the time. So if I get to a new code base with Options API, I need to go digging through components to actually understand what's happening. With Composition API, I just need to go to a file, and I know the name of this function. If the function is, the composable is named correctly, I already going to know what that is supposed to do. So huge fan of Composition API.
Cool. So like, is it easy to like, when I look at these like frameworks, like even, if you look maybe older frameworks like Rails,
Yep.
where things are like pretty structured, does it make easier to like create things like architecture diagrams for like your web app? Like just, I take like a repo, like I don't want to look into the code. I just want to like look at the GitHub repo, and I want to say, okay, it's a Vue project, just run some tool, and I can kind of see like all sorts of, I guess components or is there such a tooling? Like how do you like start by reading? Is there like a way to read a Vue project from like you just get a random GitHub URL? How do you do it?
Yeah. There's this phrase like let's there be light and something like that. In a Vue.js project, everything starts on the main TS. For me, everything starts with TypeScript, so main.ts, and then you start to understand from there your routes. Then from your routes, you start to understand which components or pages are involved in that, which components are inside of each page. And if I'm not mistaken, I think there are some tools involved that are going to give you the component hierarchy of your page. So you can see where each component is being used and what is the hierarchy of your page in terms of components as well. So there are some tools, but I don't think that it is as complex and as complete as backend frameworks, as you said, like Rails, Laravel, and a bunch of other ones.
Yeah, we have another one from online. What are options with Vue to deal with the state, the app state?
So how can we manage the app state in Vue? Okay. So let's separate things in two important steps. On Vue 2, we didn't have composition API. It was only options API. So in that sense, Vuex was the majority used in all projects without any doubt. So it was the state management library where you would have your mutations, your actions, your getters, and so on. In VueJS 3, with the release of Composition API, even before VueJS 3, they released a package just for Compositions API that you could use on your VueJS 2 project. With Compositions API, you can create your own stores. You're going to lack a lot of the dev tool that you mentioned that it was very important for development process. But with Vue 3, also appeared a new kind of store, a new library called Pinia. And I think they were even in Vue 2 already, but it wasn't that popular. And Vue made it default instead of Vuex. Now it adopts a Pinia store to manage your application state. Much easier. You don't have on Pinia, for example, you only have actions and getters and the state. So there are no mutations anymore as there used to be in Vuex. So a lot more simplified, and these are the two kind of answers that I can give.
All right.
All right, yeah.
I don't know if you have any more questions. Maybe we can thank again Bruno.
Thank you very much.
And yeah, get a beer and chat a little bit more. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Try my best not to break it.
Okay, perfect.